Hi, and welcome to my advanced guide for Spellcaster University. I'm Icon, and this video is going to be all about giving you a 3-star rating for your schools and getting as many successful graduates out of your universities. This video will not show you the one correct path of building schools and playing the game. Much more, I want to give you a set of ideas to work with once you're familiar with the game. If you're still new to the game, I also did a beginner's tutorial. And with these tools, you will be able to easily achieve the 3-star rating because, it isn't that hard if you know what you're doing to achieve at least 2 stars. The 3 stars can sometimes be a little bit unlucky, but most of the time you will be able to get 2 out of 3 stars and 3 stars most of the time. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? I started here on the map screen because I just wanted to talk about the maps in general. A few short words. Every map has drawbacks, and every map has also a couple of benefits, but it's really important that you know your drawbacks and play accordingly to them. So, for example, in the marsh, your students lose health and sanity. Do something against that as quick as possible. In the volcano, you have fires, a lot of fires. Do something about that. It's really important that you play against these drawbacks and that you are aware about them. So for this tutorial, we're going to get into the forest where students are just a little bit poorer. So that means gold generating items are more important than usual. But that's just some note on the side. At the beginning of each map, Skeleton Dude here gives you a choice of cards to start with. If you are able to discern the rooms already, I strongly advise you to always pick either a magic room or that one room which counteracts the problems of your map. For example, in the marshes, you can maybe get early hands on something like a healing room. Really important. So in this scenario, I know that the stable is a nature magic room. I know that 900 gold are always useful, and I know that the counselor's office and the trophy case won't teach anybody magic. I personally consider getting access to all 5 schools of magic as quick as possible as the top priority goal when you start out on every map. It's the first thing that I want to postulate here. So you can, personally, I would either go for this or that. For the sake of the tutorial, I would say I'll go for the resources. If I don't know the rooms, just go for the resources. There's never anything wrong with resources. A lot of gold extra is pretty good. So at the beginning, I really personally like to put down dormitory, refectory, and students' hall right away, because these are basic rooms which will be always used. In general, I like to have refectories and dormitories multiple times. Instead of upgrading them, I like to go for 3 dormitories, 3 refectories, and, well, students' halls, also 3 to 4. This is for school sizes which range about 100 students at a time. You don't need a bed at all times for every student. Beds don't get used by the students all the time, and they're not bound to them. So therefore, you don't need them all the time. Also, it's not that horrible if students go outside to satisfy their wishes somewhere else. Just try to have roughly 1 bed, 1 dormitory for every 25 to 30 students at least. If you run into problems with that, amp up the ratio for that, because it's always a little bit different in terms of map and other circumstances. Just as a rule of thumb, these things worked out quite decently for me. So the next step I want to go for is drafting a couple of cards. Since I said getting mana is so important, the generalistic rooms are just what I want to have. I'm going to draft a couple of them until I am happy with my selection. Nature room is good. Shadow room, light room. I don't want to have multiples, if possible. So here at this point we would get a multiple. So I don't want to have 2 arcane rooms. So I'll rather take a new house card. In general, a 3rd house card is always good to have. Okay, so now we can get started. Let's draft the first house card. I always like to put down houses as follows. 1 house to replace the general class, which has traits like athletic or worker. Worker gives you a general bonus to magic. 1 house where I just put in everybody who's not fit for any specialized house. So for this scenario, for example, I'd really like to have any of these up here: light sleeper, gourmet, well-behaved. Any of those are good. I personally would prefer well-behaved because eating and sleeping is just necessary. Misbehaving is unnecessary, and therefore it's better to have that. Also quite attractive for generalistic houses for me are traits like athletic. Courageous is very, very not so interesting in my opinion. This gets more interesting if you are playing on higher difficulty levels, though. Just a word of advice. Okay, so House Verfala will be my generalistic house. Let's get to the other students here. So as I see here, this is perfect. Shadow Disciple and Child of Nature. These traits are, I like to pair them together to know where I will put my students. So Shadow and Nature, we put a focus on Shadow and Nature, and here it really depends on your personal preferences. I really like to forbid all the other schools with some specialists to give them really high levels on certain schools. This is because this favors more specialized high grade graduations. Whereas if you go for these jack of all trade builds, where you have, for example, something like that, where we only have priorities on these schools, you will get a mishmash of all different skills, and chances are that the students will leave the university with rather low magical levels, and therefore the chances are pretty low to get really interesting specialists. If you are about the hunt about archmages, this is a really good way to get that, because archmages need 4 different schools on level 4 or higher, and every single branch has 3 schools to learn from. So this is the most optimized way to try to roll for archmages in my experience. So we have one specialized house. Let's see if we can get lucky here one more time. So this is the other feature, the other scenario, which happens quite often as well. We have an alchemy trade, and the last one will be just like we want to. So we're going to take the well-behaved trade, because you know now that I really like that. In that scenario, we go for alchemy preference, and the other ones I will keep allowed. So let's get into this, and I'm going to delete the general class, because the general class has no advantages towards a house, because it has no traits. So now Verfala is my new general class, where we don't have any preferences. I have a specialists class, and I have something where I will dump all the alchemy talented people. Increase that to your own liking. So since I now have a alchemy house, a shadow house, and a nature house, we now know what rooms we need. So nature is already present. Nature and shadow is already present. With the teachers, there's one word of advice that I can't stress out enough. Whenever you can get teachers that have a background like this, ex-adventurer, ex-whatever, connected to the king, choose them if you can, even if they are bad teachers. There are so many cards in the game which allow you to amp up or improve teachers. It's not that much of a big deal if you have a bad teacher. These traits give you a passive way to increase your faction standings, and this way you don't need to go visit them that often, which means you have more communications available for other things. And I personally like to use my communication thingies as much as I can to push back the Lord of Evil. So let's draft a couple of cards here. Private apartments for the teachers are also very, very important. I really like to have most of the time 1 or 2 of them, and 1 or 2 bright staff refectories. And in general, every service building needs to be built at least once. With service building, I need stuff like janitors, psychologists, and all these things. Put down at least once of them. The larger your school gets, a second one of them is really, really useful as well. When you are drafting cards, always keep in mind at the beginning of the game, there is a high deficit of gold in almost 90% of the cases. And I really discovered that the items which give you some extra gold are very, very beneficial for that end. So now we have prepared our school for the first few students, so let's summon them. As you see here now, I can now easily put them wherever I need. As with student selection, I personally like to only turn down dump students which are really poor. Also, keep in mind, even a dump student which has 7 years of student's time is worth something. So if they are dumb and poor as hell and only want to stay 3 years, that's a condition to turn them away. Everything else, honestly, if your school has the room to put them somewhere, even the most simple graduation is worth something. So about students, put them into the shelves where they can work well. For example, House Toraron would be welcoming all the Shadow and Nature gifted people. Noct of Melf will take care of all the Alchemy disciples, and everybody else will just be sitting there. So, let's quickly distribute that, and let's get the ball rolling. About events at the beginning. It's really important to note that at the beginning of the game, you can get a kickstart on whatever mana you don't have, which is highly attractive. For example, in this scenario, the peasants will always give you a chance to give you light, nature, or shadow mana. So in this scenario, I know that I don't have light. Don't take the standing influences too seriously. They are actually the least important part here about that. I didn't have a light room, didn't I? Okay. I had nature, arcane, and shadow, yeah. So with this mana, well, we went unlucky this time. I didn't get anything here. So with this mana, you can get quite often a room to kickstart your mana production with. Here, though, we get another really important and valuable thing. An item which spawns other races. Other races are basically always worth picking. Every race is just flat out better than a human. The end. There's nothing else to say about that. With the king's help, I really like to take this one, because here we see we now get access to a few rooms. We're going to take the Enchantment Workshop because I don't have a alchemy teacher yet either. So as we see here, bad and mediocre, nothing really good happening. In this scenario, always choose the better teacher and keep an eye out for these rooms to enhance them later with your cards that just amp up teachers. There's a lot of good stuff going on in that game. So last but not least, the adventurers are saying hi. The adventurers here give you a similar choice, but it's a little bit coded. So what kind of mage do you train? Mend folks, that's nature and light, I think. I'm not sure if it's also light, but nature for sure. Blow up things, that's arcane magic. And magical trinkets, that's alchemy. So since I don't have any light room yet, we're going to check out what's happening here. So you see here, there's a mixture of light cards and other stuff. But here we get another gold generator, and this will be already enough to put our school through the early phase quite easily. The orcs are always a bit of a problem. Don't you worry too much about disgruntling them. That's just normal. That's just normal. Your early communicators are spent best, in my humble opinion, into... where is it at? Into the peasants if you can, because the peasants give you the loading speed of messenger guinea pigs by 20%. Basically, this is the most efficient way to get as many guinea pigs as possible. After that, it's up to you which bonuses you prefer. I personally really like to go for the orcs because it reduces the cost of all cards by a further 5%, which means more cards, and more cards means faster progress. After that, I just keep it to you. The only thing that I want to mention, it's really important to know that the king is a very efficient way to push back the Lord of Evil. 15 reputation can be traded for 3% pushback, and it's really, really powerful. So use this in your later stages of the game. For the peasants, always try to have some nature mana in the pocket, because with 25 nature mana you can easily improve your relations with these guys. So now we are at the point where I personally also just like to rack up students as stupid. If you are a little bit low on gold, you can also go here into the school rules and increase the application fees. If you are low on gold, you can also have paid dormitories. You can also cut on the salaries of the teachers, but I highly disregard that. I personally like to go for paid dormitories if I have problems with the money, and if I really struggle with money, increasing the application fees for a couple of days can be really good. So with the discipline stuff, well, you can also mitigate a lack of rooms. As you see here, poor discipline is more misbehaving and thus boredom, and vice versa here. So basically, if you lack items or rooms to counter these statuses, you can adjust that a little bit too. But I must honestly say, most of the time that kind of micromanagement ain't that important. Okay, once that's all set up, I really like to just wait it out. If you really want to get into an ideal approach there, you try to put down as few as possible specialized rooms from here. Oh, well, animals. Let's take the fawn. About upgrades and trinkets, the banners. Whenever you can draft a banner, they are insanely powerful. Also, deep folk. Let's talk about deep folk for a moment. Deep folk are insanely important for your whole conquest, because this trait here is so useful. They repel the Lord of Evil's progress by a percentage equal to the prestige gained in the future. Deep folk are, in that regard, so useful that it's already worth it to just put up, to just spam house cards until you get one with the popular trait, which doubles the reputation gains from students, which just doubles the pushback from the deep folk. Therefore, whenever you can draft cards which give you extra races, extra different species, go for it, because they are just awesome. And they also unlock a couple of extra decisions in the adventures, and that's also really cool. So here we go, alchemy room, just what I wanted. Under the King's Protection, for example, is another one of those which I value very highly. So basically, my verdict is wherever you can rack up passively standing with the factions, it's just very good for you. Okay, so let's get started with the rest. We have basically already set up the necessary groundwork for the 3-star work. Let's just wait it out until we get our first curriculum quests. Here we go. So this is one of the first real big stepping stones. You will always end up with one of these quests, and I personally consider them the hardest part of your 3-star challenge. Here you get to get a certain amount of people to a certain degree of graduation. So as you see here, it's either 3 bodyguard mages, 20 midwives, or 12 sandmen. As you see here, these are the schools that are necessary to train these people. The less people you need to train, the higher the requirements for the certain job are. For example, I'm pretty sure that the bodyguard mage will need a pretty high level of assassination, portal magic, and poisons, whereas the midwives, since we need 20 of them, need a rather low level of herbalism and sacred magic. The Sandman is rather in between, so I'd say around a level of 2 and 3 in enchantment and herbalism. To select this properly, there's an easy rule of thumb. If it's your first map you're playing on, always try to go for the quest where you have to train a lot, but with a low amount of different skills. So always pick that one with the highest number in the brackets. If you are already a couple of maps deep in your campaign and you have already a couple of bonuses from your graduations, you can go for the challenge like the Sandman here, or even the bodyguard mage. The thing is here quite simple. Unless unlike other graduations, when you have this quest online and a student has met the requirements for that certain graduation, all other backgrounds will be disabled and they will go for that one background. So if this is too confusing, basically every graduate that has the skills to be a midwife will turn into a midwife. Unlike before, where the game just rolls a wild percentage about the future of your students, every student which fits the requirements for this quest will jump into that. Okay, so since this is since I don't have any bonuses, we're going to go for the midwife if I would be actually playing a campaign. But for the sake of the tutorial, I want to pick the Sandman, because there goes the next thing that I want to talk about. So now we have our first quest. Enchantment and herbalism are the things we need. What I really like to do is that I now don't go for any rooms in these schools except for enchantment and herbalism. I mean, in this scenario, I kind of like failed. Or no, I didn't. I have only the Enchantment Workshop, and now I will try to get only the room for the herbalism. This way, they can only learn all a omnipresence of these skills, or just the skills that are necessary for that background. This is especially important when you want to achieve the higher quality backgrounds, because they are just quite hard to achieve. And if you only have the specialized rooms for the necessary quest, you have a very high chance of getting these quests done in no time. But this is the only way that I discovered so far to manipulate fate here a little bit, except for founding now a house which has only alchemy and herbalism. But let's talk about the next curriculum quest here first. The second curriculum quest is almost every time grinding up a certain reputation, or you should try to get that. In this scenario here, our main quest will be to have a relationship of 90 with the orcs. This needs to be only checkmarked once, so you need to hit the rating of 90 once, and then you can forget about that. And therefore, these are really easy goals to achieve. So beyond that, I also picked up an aquarium here. This is a really powerful thing. Active characters in this room generate gold. Just don't put it into the entrance hall. There it would be useless. So if we go for the houses now, we can just go for a preference of nature and alchemy. And this way we will have a certain bias towards that. And after that, a couple of days later, you will get the last quest, which will be always about gathering a certain amount of color of mana. This is by far the easiest task, and you should always try to focus into one of these schools one way or another. Since I now have a certain bias towards alchemy and nature in this run, I would go for Alchemy Specialist. I really like to combine this with my job quest if I can, but the order in which they appear is not always the same, so therefore it's not that easy. Also, if you struggle getting a certain room or a certain color of mana, the Sneaky Merchant campsite gives you an opportunity to buy classrooms for 200 gold or other cool things, but if you need classrooms, this is way to go. It can be still that you will be unlucky and don't get what you need, but this is very cool to do so. Okay, and with all these things already said and done, you are already on a very bright path to unlocking all these stars, at least on a normal difficulty. So what is left to be said from my side is you really are good off if you try to focus as much as you can on pushing back the Lord of Evil in course of your campaign, because this is very helpful. Also try to get as many students as many student cards as possible, but only try to turn them in as soon as you have a couple of refectories extra. As you see here, I'm pretty close to 30 people in the school, and therefore I am rather uneager to pick up new students. But I really like to have these student cards on the hand because they can be turned into pretty cool Joker cards at some point, especially once you have set up new dormitories and new refectories. It's pretty cool to just kickstart your development with that. Beyond that, you are on your own. I know that with these, if you keep these things in mind, it's quite easy actually to get there. As you see here, I also like to draft multiple copies of these rooms to just take care that the evolution is going to be as good as possible. And also there's so many things that you can do here. You can hire those dragons from the fitting colors, and here begins the optimization, the realm of optimization. I personally like to acquire every specialized room at least once as soon as I have all 3-star quests to maximize the amount of mana I gain from there on. Now, for example, my goal would be to get a herbalism room. And also one last thing that I want to talk about is the guinea pig room. There's a guinea pig tower. It is so friggin' powerful. Grab it as early as you can and spam it. Just spam it as often as you can. Duplicates of that. Because basically the guinea pig tower is just a building which allows you to get more messenger guinea pigs. And I made the experience, nothing gave me as much pushback against the Lord of Evil as these guinea pig events. That and the deep folk people. So let's summarize it about the artifacts and such. I want to say, try to keep up with the banners, which increase your reputations as much as possible. Put them into rooms that are highly frequented. Try to get items that give you extra gold. If you're unable to acquire them, you can go for the headmaster's office to get a little bit of gold extra there, because gold rooms are extremely powerful to get yourself refectories and dormitories. Refectories, dormitories, and students' halls are extremely important and powerful, and try to not stuff them all into one corner. Try to spread them throughout your school so that whenever a student gets tired, he can just fall towards the next room where he wants to be. Beyond that, there's a lot of room for optimization. I haven't talked about half of the things that I would deem smart to optimize on. The last thing that I want to mention here is, if you want to really get efficient with your schools, try to put the respective magic schools close to each other. If you want to be really, really insanely awesome, then you put the school rooms that fit to your houses close to each other. For example, the shadow and the nature rooms. If I would put them close to each other, and then House Toraron students would be experiencing a maximum of efficiency, because they would be needing not too long traveling. They would be not having too long traveling times to get from one room to the other. Alright, but be that as it may, with these things in mind, you should be easily able to get to the point where you want to be. With your graduatees, maybe a last word about that. I really like to go for the first few times for the upgrades that give you just a lot of flat out resources like gold or whatever. Try to avoid peasants, of course, and try to rack up as many permanent bonuses as possible during your first few runs. Your first map will always be the worst map, basically. This is normal. This is perfectly normal, because these graduate bonuses that you collect will form your career a lot. Therefore, the first maps are the hardest. That's why I recommend so much on the first map. Don't do the mistake I did here. Don't take the Sandman. Take the Midwife. Take the low level graduation goals, because they are way easier to be fulfilled when you don't have a lot of traits to lean on, because the longer you play your school, the more passive traits you will gain, which just make you so much more powerful. All right, so one last thing about artifacts for students. I would always pick them if I can. These artifacts that give your students certain bonuses when they reach a certain level of magic, once they are stacked, the necessary levels get reduced. So Shamanic Staff, if I would spam that one more time, level 1 in Druidism would be enough to trigger that. These things can be insanely powerful if you stack them up, and therefore go for it if you can. Alright, I think that was enough for one video. I hope you found that somewhat helpful. Finally got my second dormitory. And feel free to drop me your comments down below. If there are any questions left, feel free to ask away. This game's very deep and complex, so I'm pretty sure I left out a lot of things that would be cool to mention. But anyway, leave a thumbs up if that video was cool for you. Helps me beat the algorithm game. And also, if you like that content, check out my channel. I do daily videos, so just subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and you won't miss anything in the future. Last but not least, down there in the description below is also a link to my Twitch channel where I do daily streams, so if you want to get in touch, I'd be more than happy if you did. So, last point on the advertisement agenda, there's also links for financial support, tipping me. I'm a coffee aficionado as well. Just do what you want to do. I'd be more than grateful about that. End of the advertisement. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. Have good fun with this game. See you soon. Bye-bye.